a topic that has been on healthcare leadership's mind for the last couple of years, and more so in the forefront of today amid these times, and that's nursing retention, specifically with a focus on new graduate nurses. There's a lot that we've done and we've discussed about what do we do to retain nurses, and oftentimes we're not involving those that have gone through nursing school and those that are new grad nurses into the discussion into what does it take to retain this very viable generation of nursing, and how can we keep them? So a little bit about myself, for those that don't know me, my name's Noelle Coles, and I am a new grad retention leadership coach and also leadership vitality coach. I recently developed a program that was designed and built for leaders on how to retain new graduate nurses. So stay tuned for that. We're going to launch that program in January. And then we'll do a quick roundtable of introducing everybody to you as well. And first, I'd like to start off with my awesome co-host, Holly. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Noelle. Thank you for the awesomeness. I'm Holly Kalua, and I am transitioning from a corporate leadership position. I'm in my own consulting and coaching. And what I've been doing over the years is helping healthcare organizations increase their employee engagement and retention. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Noelle. And also decrease employee burnout and turnover. Ultimately, that helps the organization increase their net revenue, because we all want to be successful and sustainable in the future.
Awesome. Thank you. And then one of our special guests, Kelly, go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Faria. I have been a nurse for only a year, and I currently work in the pediatric ICU. And I'm a nurse resident.
Thank you, Kelly. Kalayha?
Hi, I'm Kalayha Smith. I'm a soon-to-be nursing student, and I'm a birth and postpartum doula.
And Emily?
Hi, my name is Emily Mazurak, and I'm a second degree student, also with a lot of pediatric experience, who's been teaching clinical this last semester. And also, after my own burnout story about a year and a half ago, I created the Fill Up Your Cup project to help burnout nurses as well.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies. And just to give a shout out to those that have chimed in outside of the network as well, we've got Weiser from Idaho who's coming in. So if those of you that are watching, if you can just comment below, let us know where you're calling in from, and also hit the like button so we know that you're here, and we'll go ahead and get started. So I want to give a little background as to why this is such an important discussion and topic for me. And as far back as I can remember, retention of nurses has been at the forefront of my career. I can remember as a new grad nurse having a preceptor who to this day, 20 plus years later, is still a very good friend of mine, and I can still look towards as a mentor. And these were the small bits of nuggets that as new grads, if you have that experience, you hold on to. And I have always thought that, my gosh, this is such an important area that healthcare leaders now have to really kind of design and hone into, because these nurses are going to experience different types of onboarding, orientation, wherever they go. And the important piece is, what can you as a healthcare leader bring to the table that's going to allow these nurses to stay in the organization that you are in? And I think a lot of that comes with strength and humility. So Holly and I will also talk about, from a leadership perspective, what that looks like. And then really the focus is, where can we go with this? What can we do to retain the new nurses that we have now? Just a couple of facts that people may not know. Turnover rate has been extremely high, up to 19.1% over 2019, and it costs roughly $44,000 per nurse that resigns from their position, and it costs an organization anywhere between $4 and $6 million a year for the amount of nurses that they lose in order to bring them back in, new program orientation and all of that. So you can imagine, as new nurses, these are things that you're not looking into, but it takes a lot of effort and also a lot of time and money to be able to keep the nurses that we have. So I'm gonna I'd like to put it onto the group right now and do a focus on what brought you guys into nursing. Why were you excited about becoming a nurse? It doesn't matter who could start first. And actually, Kalayha, if you want to start first, since you're going into nursing school, what made you switch your role from a doula to a nurse?
So I guess coming back from COVID, going back into the hospital, I noticed that, you know, I want to be a labor and delivery nurse. So like going back into it's kind of a little more of a like connection there, because it was kind of difficult, I feel like, for doulas to get into the hospitals for birthing parents, and it was just like a rough time for a while. And I love helping moms. I think that's like the most important part. And being a doula, that's what it's meant to do, but sometimes not everybody has a doula. So I thought being a labor and delivery nurse could be somewhat of that balance of me being able to help moms who don't have a doula, to be that supportive person that they need, to be that advocate for them, to be able to help a mom achieve the best birth that they want to have. And I think that's just super important. I love babies equally as much, so seeing them coming into the world is just an amazing thing to help a mom get there. And that's kind of just how I want to achieve that. I think it's so important to have a good nurse by your side during your birthing process. So that's kind of how I wanted to be a nurse and how my connection came about.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
And Kelly, what made you want to be a nurse?
I honestly don't have a really great answer for that. I feel like I grew up around a lot of people that I admired as a nurse, Noelle being one of them, as well as two of my close family friends. So I think that's something I've always grown up around. And with the fact that I could do it with children, which is something that I also have a passion for, it was just a sealed deal on what I always wanted to do. I can't remember when I started wanting to be a nurse.
Awesome. And Emily?
So for me, nursing was never on my radar until I was actually in grad school. I was getting a master's in public health, and I figured this would be a great way to do a lot of one-on-one teaching and a lot of one-on-one interaction, which sometimes I feel like you can miss looking at huge populations. And again, like everybody else is kind of saying, being able to help and give back. So I thought this would meld everything really well.
Awesome. And I think, and it's so important to hear that, because people are coming into, or nurses are coming into the profession from a different degree. And it's very helpful to get that experience and that knowledge that no matter what you're doing, knowledge transcribes itself and brings itself into any field that you're going into. And I often found, speaking with nurses who have gone to different colleges, that also becomes a different experience when you come into the world of nursing, as a new grad nurse. Some nurses who have gone to four-year institutions may not get orientation until the end of their term. And some nurses coming into a different program, similar to myself, where you start clinicals within a semester or two as coming into it. And, and I look to all of you guys and just ask the question openly and answer it at any time. Do you find that, given your experience of going through school, that does make a difference when you come on to orientation as a new graduate nurse, what that may look like? Have you known other nurses who have started clinicals a lot earlier than you have? And it'd be really helpful to get an idea from a leadership perspective of how much exposure have you had to patients prior to coming in? And what are your thoughts or fears coming in as a new nurse into a new grad program? And I'm sort of looking at Kelly as she's smiling. So Kelly, go ahead and chime in on your thoughts about that.
I think it definitely makes an impact on like the school, as well as if you are going to a 2-year program versus going back as a second degree. I think it definitely has made an impact on like what I can see as a new nurse. A lot of my colleagues that I work with now have much different school experiences than I do, as well as just the clinical experience as a whole. The school that I went to, we didn't have the full 12-hour clinicals, where I think a lot of the schools in the area I'm working in do. And I think that did improve upon their schooling experience, only in the fact that they did see a lot more within 12 hours, of course, than within 6, which is all I had. So I definitely think it makes an impact. And you also see more of what actually a hospital, how it functions and how it works, where I don't think I fully saw what it was like from change of shifts and those little things that really do make a difference.
That's an interesting perspective. Thank you for sharing. And Kalayha, I know you're starting school soon. Do you know the type of program that you're going into?
Yeah, so I'm stuck between two. I have one college, Holy Family, that I was actually referred to by my boyfriend's family member, and she said she did the program and she kind of went right into it, or getting my degree at a community college and then transferring to another college, which is, the problem is like really how much time I want to spend. Meanwhile, I already went to college for 5 years, so like, do I really want to spend another 4 going back to school on learning things that I've already know majority of? And like money is also a problem. So it's kind of like trying to figure out what's really the best route for me. I want to also try to have somewhat of a part-time job while also being a student. So that's kind of a factor that I'm trying to figure out. So there are some slight complications, but not really just like big factors that I need to contemplate on my path. So yeah,
Awesome.
Figuring it out.
And then just to add to this, so right now I've been teaching virtual clinical, which is something I never did in school. For me, I was in the hospital within, I think, 2 or 3 weeks of starting my accelerated program. And we were there at least, at least twice a week because we were only there for 4 semesters. But I think right now, when we look to people that are graduating in May or maybe kind of the winter semester after that, a lot of these students haven't actually ever interacted with a patient. A lot of the students that I had maybe had gone to 1 or 2 clinicals, and then after that things got shut down with COVID. I've been doing everything online. And while there are these interactive computer simulations, it's still not the same thing as having to walk into a room and actually talk with a patient face to face, or to actually do an assessment, right? As instructors, we can only run through a head to toe so often, and it looks great when they type it up on paper, but it's a whole nother world when you have to create a little bit of small talk and you've got a lot of distractions running around, and maybe you don't have kind of the notes in the computer in front of you to help prompt you. So I think orientation is going to look a lot different come kind of the next few residency classes that start as well.
Definitely.
And you bring up such a great point, Emily. And before I move on, I just want to say hi to everyone that has chimed in. And I am such a rookie at this. I will apologize in advance. I see a couple of the questions coming in, and just wanted to say hi. Faith has chimed in, Sarah, Patty, and it looks like we have a couple of guests coming in from Idaho and the Midwest as well. So welcome everybody. And I will, if you see me glance over to the side, just please know that I am not paying attention, but I have 2 screens up, and me being very challenged with electronics, I'll be looking over at the comments to make sure we really get the group included in as well. Your questions and feedback are instrumental to the conversation as well. So please, if you have a question or comment, drop it in the box and let us know. And to piggyback off of what Emily had stated too, when I look at retention, I look at it similar to what nurses know best, is that discharge starts the day of admission, right? When I look at this, we learn this in nursing school, it's very cliche, but retention starts the day of acceptance. The minute a nurse signs on to a position, this is where we have to really start to look to retain these employees. Leadership presence is extremely important in this process as well. And through new grad residency programs, or new grad programs, depending on what you call it across the country, leadership involvement with human resources is also very, very pivotal to develop that combined relationship and also reaching out to your employees. I've had the experience of being in many programs where leadership involvement does make a difference, because you have to think about having a new nurse coming into an organization. If you don't really get to meet those that are precepting you ahead of time, or your leader coming down to sort of do a meet and greet, it could be terrifying from the feedback that I've gotten back from new grad nurses. Because then all of a sudden you show up and you're like, oh, I'm here. Emily, what has been your experience as, with being a few years out as a nurse, and then as an educator? looking at different positions, when you, even if you're not just coming in as a new grad nurse, when you're a new employee into an orientation, give us just like a, an understanding of, have you had different spectrums of what that looks like, good orientation introductions and not, and what advice would you give to leaders that are watching?
So thankfully, I've always had a really good orientation experience. I think the exception to that might be is when I was a traveler, but you only get 2 days of orientation. So you pretty much have to figure it out on your own. And I think thankfully, I had to take a personality quiz, honestly, for one of the first placements that I did, because the educator was very good at matching up certain kinds of personalities to make sure that these relationships worked. And they were very candid in the beginning, which I liked. Her name was Rebecca, the nurse educator. I won't forget her. And she was very candid and said, if this isn't working out, there's no reason for you to struggle through. And I was in the PICU. It's a 16-week orientation. There's no reason for you to struggle and be miserable for 16 weeks because it's not good for you and your learning. It's not going to be good for the preceptor, right? They're not going to want to precept again if they have a bad relationship or a bad experience. And I think just knowing that it was okay that people don't necessarily jive. And I worked on a huge PICU. We were 36 beds. Like there's at least one or two nurses that is on the unit that you're going to be able to jive with. And I think as a new nurse, that's super scary, right? To start advocating for yourself first thing out the door. And I don't know if all of the new grad programs are kind of like that, where they tell you day one, not only are you educating or advocating for your patient, but you really need to start advocating for yourself as well.
And I guess to chime into, or, sort of laser in onto that a little bit more, did you feel at any time that if you felt that there were struggles there, was there a preceptor or a nurse manager or leader there to be able to answer those questions?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say for us, I think because we were such a big unit, there were so many levels of people that you could talk to before maybe you necessarily needed to bring it to a manager. And I also think that having those different outlets is also a lot less scary to, go on your second day to your manager and already have these concerns or worries, where you might be able to talk to somebody who's maybe 5 years out or 10 years out, or, talk with the charge nurse of the day as well. So I think it's important also for newer nurses to know who your resources are, either on a given shift or on a given day, but also maybe people that might be able to answer your question or give you a little bit more guidance, as opposed to having to try to track down your manager.
That's great feedback. Holly, any questions that you might want to ask the group? I know I've been doing a lot of the talking.
No, that's okay. I was just trying to figure out if I could pull up the chat and help with that. It's such a great reminder to advocate for yourself. I went to school 35 years ago. And so that was the day when you're a student in your blue dress, your white nylons, and your white shoes, and you walk in and you sit down, and then you're like, oh, there's a doctor, and you jump up. Here, doctor, here's the chair. And, it was clear. You took orders, you did what people told you, and you would just disappear. And so I saw colleagues that would get into nursing last 6 months or a year because they felt so small, so insecure, so insignificant. And one, just quit and start working in a dress shop. And so I want to encourage everyone on their walk, whether you're early in your career, you're in mid-cycle, and you're like, this is not what I thought I was getting, or towards the end and burnout. Have nursing fit you. You don't need to fit nursing. And so it's such a wonderful thing to hear at Emily's that, let's make sure you have a good fit. For one, we each have our own personality styles. And being in ICU, that meets certain needs, a certain brain function. OR, you don't have a need to talk to people, maybe, yes or no. So find where that's at. And Kalayha, I was a labor and delivery nurse in nursing school. I had and this is, really pay attention to how you make your decisions in your career path. Because I had a friend who got pregnant as a teenager as I was going through school. And I got to go in and help count to 10 with count to 10 and then push. And I was like, oh, I really helped her, you know. So that was my goal, was to become a labor and delivery nurse. And, you know, it's incredible. And there are sad days too. So
there's a
anyway.
question that came in from Rallis, and I'll try to scroll back to it now. And that was, what you learned in the nursing program, has that changed now? And if so, why? And I apologize, Rallis, I'm trying to scroll back into the comment that they're moving forward.
It's in the chat also.
Oh, thank you. Hold on, let me read that. What has been the same or different from what you learned before starting the nursing program? And any advice you would give to other nurse hopefuls?
I guess, can I answer?
Yeah.
I guess like what I've been doing and what I've learned is that you got to do your research. So like making sure that the nursing school you go into is a program that's going to fit your style of learning. So I thought about going to start all over and just do the whole 4-year BSN and cry a little bit because I'm going back to school after already being in school for so long. But then I found there's different opportunities and slightly better options for me, which would be like second degree programs, when my bachelor's degree is already in health studies. So majority of the classes that I took thankfully transferred over, and it helps a lot already knowing the information that you're about to go back into. So I think what's really important is finding a really good school and really good kind of like mentors to look up to and ask questions to, because it's just super important to kind of get you on the right track. I've talked to school nurses, I've talked to psychiatric nurses, I've talked to ped nurses. Like, I think it's just so important to get the correct information and learn that there's just different paths for everybody. And I've learned that even at a hospital here where I'm located, that there's no right way of going into nursing, and you just kind of got to find your right path, basically.
That is
Well,
such
I want to add to
thank you for
Kalayha,
that.
on your mentorship. It's really critical as you're going into school. What is your why? Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Is it because I want mom to be proud of me? Is it because I can't figure out what else to do? You really have to lock in that why.
Definitely.
Because when you walk in the hospital and the smells, the sounds, the pressure, the stress gets to you and you're like, I'm out of here. You have to know there's going to be those bad days, and someone may even insult you. I had people say, do you have any common sense? And I was like, what? You know, so the things you will never expect and worse, you have to lock in that why. I am here because I want to make a difference, or frankly, I want to make a good income and have a variety in my profession. It's okay, whatever the reason is, but lock that in and have your mentor know what your why is, and they can remind you when you're in that pit why you're pursuing that.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Thank you, Holly. And a quick question came in from Kevin. He's got a question out to the group for you guys. They are planning an internship program for nursing students. Any suggestions or advice that you can give Kevin right now?
I would say to try to open up as much possibility as you can to allow student nurses really to see different fields of nursing. I think for new grads, and myself included, everybody gets so pigeonholed, right? They think of a real nurse as somebody that works in the ICU or the ED or, those very high stress jobs. And I think a lot of us haven't necessarily seen kind of the more non-traditional roles, right? Like you're mentioning school nurse, or even in the OR. I didn't know a single person in the OR until my school had set up an OR shadow day for all of its students. So I think being able to just give people that opportunity to figure out what their why is and to figure out how their why will align with the job, I think that also will further down the road help with the retention, right? If you go into the ICU and there's just too much going on, then maybe med surg might be more your way, or maybe something like occupational health, which I think is another job within the hospital that not a lot of people talk about. And I think once you kind of get locked in and you see where your interests lay, I think that also helps for students to either want to continue on that unit that they've been interning on, or even just staying within an institution.
I agree. I talked to a nurse my last birth that I was in October, and I asked her, like, what got you started in nursing? Like, how did you like do this? Like, what was your why? And she was like, honestly, I switched between so many different types of fields in the nursing world. I was in OR, I was in an emergency room, and now I'm a labor and delivery nurse. And so she's like, don't be afraid to switch up your occupation in that sort of way. You're not stuck. Like, you can move around and you can find your niche and like just get comfortable in what you think is best for you. So I agree with what Emily was saying.
I think on the topic of internships, where you were saying starting something like that, I think what would be really wonderful is something that always deterred me from applying to them was that they always had such a high GPA requirement. And I think that that was something that always deterred me from applying, because I wasn't someone that had the best grades in the entire class. And I think that being inclusive by all means, because I don't think necessarily, especially from what I learned from actually working, is that the nurses that had the 4.0 might not necessarily be the best on the floor. And I think that I would have really, I did myself a disservice by not applying to those things just because of my GPA.
Yeah,
Right.
I totally agree.
And I love that you said that, Kelly, because, when we, as nursing leaders, when I was in the director role and in the nurse manager role, that was often something that people looked at on resumes. And when I went through nursing school, C equaled RN, right? And that's how, and C for me was like anything below a B was considered failing. But I could do clinicals with my eyes closed like this. But when it took time to take a test, I still struggle with that.
Yeah.
And I think the three of you brought up such a valuable point, and that when you're interviewing, talk to the candidate. Have a human interaction and conversation. Don't make it so much about strict questions that you're reading. Get to know who they are. Because if you break down those walls and barriers, you're going to get to know that being book smart and having a 4.0 or plus isn't necessarily going to make you the best nurse out there on the unit. And there's a question that just came in from Sarah as well, I'm going to ask. But one other comment that Emily, you brought up that I think is pivotal for healthcare leaders to really consider is, if not part of orientation, shortly after orientation, valuable feedback that I got from new nurses was going on what we called like field trips to other departments. If I had a patient that needed to crash onto ECMO, but not in the unit and go into the OR, my nurses went with that patient to the OR, did a handoff in the OR, and got to see what that looked like. Because when you meet the nurses in other departments, you break down the barriers, right? And it sounds like when you have that opportunity to do that, there's not, oh, you're a floor nurse, oh, you're an ICU nurse, oh, you're the OR nurses. You get out of that stigma of everyone in a different department, because at this point, when you have face-to-face value, everybody knows each other and you're all in it for the same thing. So Sarah asked a question, as a nursing student, what was the hardest part of finding the right fit for you after graduation? And did you gravitate towards the hospitals that you completed your clinical placements at?
I didn't apply to a single school that I had clinical, or a single hospital that I had clinical at. I've applied to all different places for different reasons. I'm definitely a very indecisive person. I applied to 20 colleges and I went on 15 interviews. So I don't really, even for my position now. So I'm not really good at making decisions. So I definitely want to scope everything out first before I make one. And I think the things that sold me the most were I wanted to be part of a nurse residency program. I didn't want to just be thrown into the mix, because I truly felt like coming out of school, I was like, I don't even know if I spent more than 5 hours at clinical, how am I going to be a real nurse? So I think what sold me on it was that the nurse residency programs, and then learning what they actually do in the nurse residency programs to educate you outside of school, because I think that was definitely something that if I knew that going in, I would have been more sold on the place that I work now than I would have been at the time.
Good point.
So when I had finished my NCLEX, I knew I always wanted to work with kids, and unfortunately the the pediatric hospital, they just built a brand new one in Baltimore and they overstaffed it. So unfortunately, my hopes and dreams of becoming a pediatric nurse right out of school were a little bit dashed. And I waited for quite a while. I waited almost 6 months before I accepted my first job offer because I really was holding out. Like I knew this is what I wanted to do. And in the end, I took an adult med-surg job. It was something that I did not want to do. And you know what? I ended up being there 11 months. It was a really bad manager. The patients were not something that I enjoyed going to work. And you could see that alignment just, I mean, it killed me to go to work every day. And so thankfully after that, I was able to find a pediatric job. But I think so many of us, especially now the hospitals being in hiring freezes, a lot of new grads that I've talked to will just jump on the first job that they can because it's such a hard market, especially if you live in an urban area where there are a lot of nursing schools and a lot of recent graduates that you just kind of jump on anything and you hope that maybe it'll work out. And if not, you suck it up for a year or two and then, you might be looking for the next opportunity.
Right. And I think that's the hardest part with healthcare leaders is that's exactly what nurses are doing. How do you capture what you're looking for in that short period of time? Because part of recruiting is you have to take into consideration as a leader, these nurses are applying to multiple places. If you do not have your finger on the pulse, you are not going to get your first pick of who you're looking for that's going to make, complement the nurse coming in and the organization to the nurse as well. So great point on that, Emily, as well. And I think that's where HR recruiters and nursing leaders have to really come together and collaborate a lot stronger in knowing when your program is going to start. More importantly, knowing when schools are graduating and coming off of, graduation. How do you get these nurses in faster? Because there is going to be, if you're late in the game, you're going to get those nurses that are just going to take what they can when they can. That in itself, you will see a high turnover rate, which actually leads into a great question that Ferris just brought up as well. And it's how can nurse educators help improve the nurse experience, especially for the new grad nurses? And I love that question because I think about those nurses that took a job to get it. These are the type of nurses that you want them to know that this could be the hospital for you. So what are your thoughts on that? How can nurse educators help improve the nurse experience for a new grad?
I think that something that the hospital I work at did that was a really great selling point was having you on the unit for 4 hours as part of your interview process. So you saw what it was like to be a nurse there. Like firsthand, you were like just shadowing the nurse on the unit and you kind of saw what that was like, as well as they gave you a tour of the unit that you were applying to work on. So you had a good feel of what it was like beforehand. And then we also got a breakdown of what the nurse residency program looked like. How many classes you met throughout the year, as well as what different certifications you would have to have within that year to show that they were, as much as you were investing in them, they're investing in you which is kind of a nice feeling to know that you're both in something together.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's important.
And that 4-hour interview, I've done a bunch of those as well. I think not only is it great that you get to talk to the manager either before or after, but you actually get to talk with the nurses on the unit and point blank, do you actually ever see your manager on the unit? Do they take an assignment to remember kind of what it's like to be a nurse at the bedside? Or, what is the unit like? How do you interact with doctors? Is everybody on a first name basis or is everybody Dr. So-and-so? So I think you can learn a lot in 4 hours that you might not get just asking questions to a manager.
Such great feedback. And I think so important because I can't imagine most organizations doing that. And I think that that's a great way to introduce and really kind of get your feet wet into that type of environment and not just do a walkthrough. And a question came in from Dave. Hi, Dave. As students, are you seeing a decline in clinical experiences due to COVID-19? And how are schools and hospitals collaborating to ensure students are receiving opportunities and experiences to enhance one's critical thinking and clinical skills?
I would say yes. The decline in clinical, I was trying to get a hospital job for the longest, either in the mother baby unit here at the Newton Hospital. I tried many things to just get my hands wet on being in a clinical setting in general. I'm a person that likes to have a job. I've had a job all my life. So I was in the biggest rut for like months, trying to find just a clinical job that will allow me to get my hands a little bit dirty and get into the swing of how being in a clinical field would work. I applied to multiple hospitals within like a 30-mile radius just so I can even just work as like a secretary or admissions just to get into that clinical field. But because like Emily was saying, there's such a halt on the hiring process that technically I was overqualified. I've had, I already have a bachelor's degree, and then on top of that, I'm going back to school for nursing. It was just kind of a giant halt on, trying to like get me in there. And a lot of jobs like even called me back and was like, sorry, but you're kind of overqualified for this job and we can't give it to you. We need somebody who's kind of lower on that like newer setting. And it was kind of just like a slight punch in the gut because you're just trying to get that experience in some way. But being a doula kind of helped with that balance of, I had 3 births this summer. So like, it was a great way to somewhat get my hands dirty on the clinical field of that. But it's also, I'm not doing paperwork. I'm not, helping other nurses around so it's again, different. And it's something that we're going to definitely have to start getting used to on a new way of what clinical really is going to be. So, yeah.
And Emily, how about from your perspective as a clinical instructor?
So where I'm teaching, all of the pediatric clinicals were canceled, and I believe that the majority of med-surg was also, for some reason, maternity was allowed in, but I'm not really sure why. So what I've seen with my students is that they're super nervous, right? They're going to have graduated with maybe having maybe one semester if people are let back in the spring, actually seeing and interacting with patients. So I know it's definitely a concern of students. And when you're working with some of those kind of very specific populations like pediatrics, for instance, getting a kid to take a medication or flushing an IV is very different in an online setting where they will sit there and they will take their medicine, as opposed to like you being in the room and you've got the mom or the dad or who's ever with them kind of staring you down. You're trying to educate and, so I think it will be definitely an adjustment. As a clinical instructor, I try to bring the real cases that I've seen into the virtual simulation. So it's, if anybody's done ACLS or PALS online, they have these simulations, right, where you give meds and you read rhythms and vital signs. So it's very similar to that, except they have a specific disease you're tackling for the day. And I can only come up with so many critical thinking skills. I only get to see these students once a week, and it's a 5-week course. So I think that there's going to be a lot of re-education and just making sure that students actually are kind of competent in their skills when they start showing up to the hospital, whenever their residency programs start or whenever they're just hired, if there isn't a residency program. Even things like stringing IV fluids. I've seen crazy pictures of students online where the school has sent home IV tubing and like a bag of fluids, and like people are hanging them from lampshades and trying to figure out how to spike stuff. And they're recording videos of from their health assessment classes, and hopefully they either have a roommate or but people have been doing them on stuffed animal. My mom is also a clinical instructor, so some of the stories she comes out with are just as wild. So we'll see what happens when things start opening up again, and hopefully they do, right, for the spring semester, so they can at least get a little bit of experience before being kicked out of kind of that nice, safe environment of being in school with a clinical instructor.
And I think, sorry, go ahead, Holly.
I was just going to mention a critical thinking skill. Depending on the culture of your education as you're going through school, like you said, pick the school that works for you. Some are more, do it because I tell you. And you really want to encourage questions is okay. And it's a good thing. And I feel better if you're asking questions because we want to know that you're thinking. If you're just going, okay. And so, we don't know if you're thinking it all the way through. Do you really care? Are you highly engaged? Are you just like checking this off? So when you have a problem and you're coming to your instructor or your mentor, have an idea of what you think the solution is. I have this situation and I'm not sure. I was thinking maybe, but would that hurt the patient? But just be real and that you've thought of it. And that's what's important, that you're starting to learn the risks, benefits, and alternatives of what you're doing. And that's how you grow. If you wait to be fed, you'll get your minimum knowledge. So.
And, one other point that you guys brought up, and I think it's important for healthcare leaders to know and to see, is that new grad nurses coming in amid these times now need to hear it from the leader that it's okay. We don't expect you to come in knowing everything that is here, because we are still learning ourselves. And I, just to give an example, for leaders to see, prior to me stepping away from my position, we brought in our next round of new grad nurses came in February. So this was at the start of the pandemic. And the first thing that I said to all of them as they were terrified coming into this was, do not think about your 16-week orientation. Think about, in the moment, the weeks where you're at, because you're not only trying to learn how to be a nurse and an ICU nurse at that, you're also learning how to take care of COVID patients and what this diagnosis looks like. And they're not just pediatrics, they're adults. And so, because if you allow yourself to be present and have those conversations with new nurses, you're giving them an opportunity to know that you're open to talk to, they can come to you, and that your focus isn't just on them finishing their 16 weeks, but perhaps it might end up being a little bit longer because they're not going to get the structured environment that they're used to working in. And I think that's just another important piece when we look at retention, to have these conversations as a manager or director with your new grads and always do a check-in. Amid these times, especially now, I can't even imagine what that must be like. We've got some amazing questions that are coming in on the discussion board right now. And let me go back. So a question from Joy Stephanie is, if you were to decide to translate your nursing background within a position at global organization from an employee nurse, engagement and inclusivity, what would you need beyond the department to feel valued as a whole person following a welcome orientation? So besides being a new nurse coming into a position, what would make you feel valued in your job?
I think just being able to see the different sides of leadership. So it doesn't necessarily have to be your nurse manager, but everybody from the nurse manager all the way up to your CNO. I think sometimes we get so pigeonholed into where we work that we kind of only know the people in our immediate environment. And even if I work night shift for a long time, so I didn't even know a lot of those people as well, right? So you're already at a disadvantage. So with those leaders coming in on off shifts, right? Somebody shows up at 4:00 in the morning while, you're drawing labs and finishing up your shift just to check in. The CNO would always come by the first Friday every month at 10:00 at night just to check in with people, and she handed out tea and cocoa. So I think it's just one of those nice things to remember that you work at a hospital, and a lot of people come to work, yes, because they're doing great things with patients, but you also are there because of the relationships you form. So it's not only with the nurses that you see every day, but it works all the way up and all the way down. I think throughout the ladder as well. And I think it's easy for us to forget that, at one point, the CNO was a nurse and had the same struggles we were, or we might feel like they might be so out of touch because it has been so while since they've been at the bedside. So I think being able to see what also everybody does at different levels and creating a little bit more transparency also helps too.
That's great.
I agree. I think just being approachable to everybody in the units. I think you should try and make a friend in each unit. Just to be able to broaden your own horizons and your own knowledge of, what they're going through. I think it's just important to always have that friend in the different unit, because then you guys still have somebody to back up on, especially if you have a bad day. They can be yeah, I understand, but be able to push you also through. And I think that's just super needed. That's the same way with nursing school. We make a pack because you're all struggling together. And so I think that it's super important. And my friend literally almost thought about dropping out because she didn't have the strong enough pack to continue. But then when she transferred schools, she became, this awesome, diehard studier, had the greatest, people behind her because she had that pact. And I think that's just important to make kind of your own little group of friends throughout. So
that's great. And so when we look at retention too, we talk about that word, right? Like we probably said the word retention at least 100 times right now. You know, I gotta ask the question, what does retention look like for you? And what do you think retention should look like for future nurses coming in? What does that word mean to you guys?
I feel like it means for me, like the value like the value to stay. Like what am I getting out of this, as well as what can I give? So I think that as like a new nurse, of course, when you get onto the unit, like first you're like struggling just to keep your feet afloat, to be afloat. But then I think that to see like what are the opportunities that I have here, like where can I go from here? I could be like a charge nurse. We have like CRNs that are on the unit that help with things like that. What does it take to become a manager on our unit? My unit personally has 4 managers. So what does it take to like be like them? And or how can I be the people that work under them, like my supervisor, or we have educators per team, and kind of finding the way how to get there. And I think the other day I had a meeting with my supervisor asking like, what do I do to move forward? Like, how can I be something else? Like, I don't know how, like, I don't know what there are to be involved in. And I think that her willingness to sit with me and show me those steps is creating retention in itself, because she took the time to make me feel valued and to show me that like I am worthy enough to become something more than just the nurse who gets to step down patients in our ICU. And right. I think that was like really important to me.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
I think retention is just a word that gets thrown around so much kind of at a higher level in the hospital, but maybe not so much at the bedside where, you know, as a bedside nurse, you just hear this rate and, you know, yes, it's great to have a full staff and, you know, not be orienting all the time, which I think in an ICU especially can be especially taxing, right? As a preceptor, I mean, I knew people that maybe precepted 3 or 4 people back to back. They were a preceptor for 2 years straight. And I think that if management was to maybe start to include the nurses, the bedside nurses in that conversation as well, I don't think I was ever included or even asked, you know, okay, you've been here 3 years, what would make you want to stay? Or it's been 3 years, what are things that we need to improve upon? And I think if you figure out what the struggles are with nurses, and I know a lot of times, right, it'll be staffing, it'll be hours, it's always scheduling, but then don't just kind of take that and be like, oh, well, everybody always complains about that. Like try to figure out or include them in the conversation to see, okay, if we can't change everything about scheduling, right, somebody's got to work the holiday, how can we include it or include you in the decision to make it so maybe scheduling or around the holidays isn't as bad as it used to be.
That's great. A question came in from Heather. What do you feel are the greatest challenges for a new nurse at the bedside?
Everything. I think when I first got there, everything. I think that's something that would have really helped with someone just breaking down what it's actually like to be in the day of being a nurse before you're actually there. I never had gotten report before I started working. I never knew what it was like. That 8 o'clock meds is like a big deal. That you have to work fast to make sure you're giving those things on time, because that sets your whole day back. I think that those baby steps of like breaking down what your day looks like and someone just like explaining it before it actually is happening would have definitely been beneficial. Even showing me where the med room was on each side. My unit has 4 sides because we have 85 beds. So to learn where all those things are on every side, because we do get to go to all sides, would make my job easier in the sense that I would at least know where to look for things. I think that was the biggest thing, because I didn't really even know what it was like what the day of a nurse even looked like before I was there for the first day, terribly overwhelmed.
Noelle, I'd like to go back to the leaders, that it's really, you know, what is the culture of safety that you've established in your unit? Because, you know, I've seen great nurses come in, but the nurses eat your young kind of thing, you know, treated that person where, you know, you're not going to learn this. It was in the common sense department. And she went on her next job. She became the director of that service line somewhere else. So we want to be careful that the groupthink doesn't label your new people. Each person is individual, and they're not necessarily the recipe that we expect. And so please honor each individual as they come in, And as Emily was talking about, what can we do to support you in your next goal? When I started, we had to do 6 months of skilled nursing, and then you had to have 1 year of med surg. And I got on med surg, and I knew that was not my calling. And so I went to the ICU leader, and I said, what do I need to do exactly to get in ICU? She says, you need 1 year of med surg, you need to do your 12 lead EKG, take basic coronary care. So as nurses, I want to encourage you to ask specifically, what do I need? And I said, okay, so April 17 of next year, I'd be eligible to get an ICU. Yes. So in April 17, I was already ready for my application, got a night shift. So you really are in control of your career. You just have to map it out. You have to be strategic about it, and you have to communicate. And so as leaders, if you can support people who are struggling and not think whether they're going to cut it or not, ask what, if we could redesign, the shifts you talked about, your day, your focus, what would that look like? And then they can tell you, well, I think I'm not getting enough patient contact. I feel like I'm just working with machines. Okay, let's look at some of these other areas. So it's not that this person isn't going to cut it. It's just this isn't the right match for them.
That's a great point, Holly. Such a great point. Thank you for sharing that too. And yes, nursing doesn't come, it's not one size fits all. And you can, as a leader or as an educator, seek value in where that nurse is at and not consider it a failure, but find a place for them. Because perhaps that being an ICU nurse may not be the right area for them, but they've got such value elsewhere. It is the job of the leader and the educator to take that nurse and say, hey, given what we've talked about, what you've learned, let's go here. Let's look at here instead and see. And I've had that experience, and I've seen nurses thrive exponentially, thinking they need to be in one area, but realizing, oh, this may not be the area for us. So thank you for sharing that feedback as well. And another question just came in. I love these questions that are coming in. I just really want to shout out to the group right now. I'm not even getting through my own questions. Yours are so much better. I love this. And it just shows the engagement and how important this subject is. And you guys are giving such incredible golden nuggets out to the leadership and healthcare teams of what that's going to look like for future nurses and future programs coming in. So a question came in from Gabriella. Do you have any advice for a new grad on their job search?
I think just taking into account whether or not you're somebody who wants a new grad program or you don't want a new grad program, I think that will help to whittle it down. Do you want, somebody who, or do you want to belong to a hospital that is a magnet hospital, right? They always place a lot of emphasis on education and going back to school or certifications if that's something that you're interested in. And I would also tell people to look at the city or the town where you're living, right? You are only a nurse for your 3 shifts a week, maybe one more if you pick up extra, but your life is so much more than just being a nurse. So making sure that you are going to enjoy doing the things that are in that area outside of your nursing career, because that's really going to save you from the burnout and again, help with you retaining a job if it's something that you love, right? Being able to find those things you really enjoy doing.
Such a great point. One more question too, and we're almost coming up on our hour. Sandy has a question. Is it helpful as a new nurse to have an appointed mentor to connect with for the first year?
I have one currently, and I've never spoke to her. I think that it would be more heartfelt, or someone that if I picked the person, or if it's someone that I had met on the unit, with having a unit so large, the nurse that I was appointed works night shift, and I would prefer not to work night shifts. So we don't even really interact with each other. I think if there was more of what someone mentioned earlier, like a personality type quiz or something along those lines, it would be more beneficial for sure. But in this situation particularly, I don't use my mentor, but I have someone that I would consider a mentor that is just someone that I speak to regularly.
And you brought up a great point, Kelly, too. A mentor doesn't have to be another nurse. It doesn't have to be somebody in your department. your mentor could be, at a retail store. It doesn't matter, because what you're talking to them is mentoring you through maturity, professionalism, and where you're going. It's not your clinical skill that you're seeking advice on mentoring. That you have your resources for that. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Is it still like that now? I mean, if you're looking for a mentor, you're going to them for other reasons, not just a hands-on clinical task at the bedside?
Absolutely. I think most of the time it's the emotional toll that being an ICU nurse takes, that you take on with that, not necessarily the skill itself. Occasionally it has things to do with like scheduling, or am I allowed to do vacation time this time, or like is not. It's like the little things like that, but most of the time it's not full on bedside skill. I usually ask someone on the shift that's actively there, that's a little more advanced or has done it more frequently than I have.
Yeah, that's great. Any last feedback? I'd like to go around to the group. If you could give any information out to, we've had a lot of great individuals comment in the group and ask some incredible questions. Any last insight that the three of you may want to share? Even you, Holly, too, as my leader co-host. Anything you want to share with the group right now?
I think important thing for retention that I learned is the open, honest communication of the leaders in your unit. Being a unit that struggles with retention, how upfront they are about that makes you want to find the reason to stay. Like, you want to know why it's not working, why nurses aren't liking it. When I've had such a good experience, I want to know what they're missing, and helping in the process of creating a unit that has a better retention rate. But if I didn't know that was an issue, I wouldn't have been able to take part in the decision making.
Great point.
And I think reminding new residents or, new nurses that it's okay to set boundaries at work, right? Not to pick up a lot of extra overtime, especially in those high surge times. I know for me, it's been really disheartening, right? I want to do so much, and to have a manager kind of keep badgering me. And even though I've tried to create that boundary, so just kind of reminding managers that retention, if you're thinking like the long-term game, right, you need to try to make sure that people are taking care of their own mental health. They're actually taking their vacation days, and to make sure that you're checking in, especially if somebody has been picking up a lot of overtime. Everybody has different financial reasons, but to make sure that they're taking care of themselves as well.
I don't really have anything. That's because I'm new. I just think you gotta find your niche. I think that's just the most important thing, and finding your why is what is going to push you through and continue to remind you constantly. If you can see the post-it notes on my wall, it's literally just constant quotes and ways to keep me motivated and ways to keep me pushing, because seeing it every day when I wake up is just what's necessary. And having a good person to look up to. So personally right now, I'm looking up to Noelle. She's family. So I'm okay, if Noelle can do it, I can do it. So it's things like that is just super important. And knowing who you can go to for questions is also what I feel is 100% necessary, because I ask 1,000,001 questions. So
good.
I think it's
Don't ever stop that.
Don't ever stop. No,
always let curiosity get the best of you. And I got to tell you, I love your post-it note wall decor. Until you said that, I had no idea that those are post-it notes up there. I just thought it was art decor.
Yeah.
And very similar. I keep post-it notes all over my walls, and each time I've touched that piece of it, if it's not something motivational, I pull it down. I get super excited still. And again, maybe that's the background of being a pediatric nurse. I'm woohoo, I did that. Or
definitely.
But you guys brought up some great points. What about you, Holly, before we?
All right. Let me do some speed bullet points. Regarding the overtime, absolutely. You're going to feel guilty. It'd be good for me. I need the money. Forget it. Right now, I need to thrive, and you don't want to get yourself into survival mode, and money is never worth it. We can tell you. So do that. Normally we would tell you don't just take any job, but in COVID you might have to take your first job. But if you can just remember, this is my first job, and this is giving me time to plan what I want to do. Have that conversation, look for that hospital that has a specialty you want, and you check with them and you check with them. The only way I got into labor and delivery was to go ahead and take a telemetry job to get in that hospital. But on my tour of orientation for telemetry, I stopped by OB director and said, this is where I want to be. What do I need to do?
Good point.
And to leaders, what I tell my staff and has really worked is your people first and your employees second. I want to take all the stress away from you on whether you're going to be treated fairly, be paid fairly, get your vacation, your family's sick. If your family's sick, don't worry about it. You will be off. And so when you can relieve that stress, they are dedicated to the end for you.
Thank you. And I'd love to ask the audience, what did you enjoy and appreciate most about what you heard today on the show? Please comment and let us know. Your feedback is going to be extremely important as we continue this journey through nurse retention moving forward. Stay tuned to my upcoming shows. They go live every Wednesday at noon East Coast time. The topic is going to be on nursing retention, and leadership throughout the next coming weeks. So please stay tuned for that, and definitely let us know what you enjoyed and appreciate about the show as much as possible. Next week, I'd like to do a shout out that there's going to be a free summit on November 17th to the 19th, and it's Convert Your Workplace Culture. Experts share their secrets on how to turn toxic teams into teaming troops. So stay tuned for that as well. That's going to be November 17th to the 19th, and you can find that on, we'll go ahead and list the email website below as well for you guys to log into that. And huge round of applause for my guest today. Thank you, ladies, so much. We've learned so much from you. Great insight. And really keep doing what you're doing. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Alice. You're doing and ask the question. So thank you, ladies. Have an awesome rest of your day.
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks.
Thank you for having us.
Bye.
Before you jump off, can we do a quick pose for the thumbnails?
Yes.
You know? All right, so a happy one.
Leia's already ready.
Okay, great. And then if you want to do a crazy one, you can do a crazy one too if you want. Awesome. You guys did awesome today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Are we off yet, Relish?
I'm leaving the stream on just for a second.
Okay.
You know, so in fact, while we're waiting for the stream, if you just want to say something else about your deal there.
Check out that summit. We're going to have speakers talking about